it's all of this programming about what it means to actually be a human and what our limitations are, what we can do and what we can't do, that we don't realize are actually just programs that we're running that actually aren't even true. And we get to decide what the program is, and we get to decide what we're capable of, because the truth is we're capable of way, way, way more than we've been taught. And a lot of that programming is serving to like keep us in these lower frequencies, these lower states of consciousness, so that we don't actually discover the truth of who we are and what we're actually capable of.
Alyse Bacine is a breathwork practitioner and spiritual mentor, and focuses on healing ancestral trauma and normalizing mindfulness, meditation, and breathwork practices. I know you're going to learn so much from this conversation, as I did, and I'm excited to have Alyse on the podcast as we go deep into how to heal trauma through practices like breathwork and mindfulness, and how to apply energy healing into your life. So enjoy this podcast with Alyse Bacine. You're listening to A New Way of Living with Dan Voss, inspiring you to a new life of breathwork, cold therapy, and plant medicine. In this week's episode, my guest is Alyse Bacine. Alyse is a breathwork practitioner, spiritual mentor, and the CEO of Alyse Breathes LLC. She has her master's in counseling psychology and certifications in both social emotional learning and mindfulness practices, as well as an extensive background in the mental health field. I'm having Alyse on the podcast today knowing that she has always wanted to expand her mission of healing ancestral trauma and normalizing mindfulness, meditation, and breathwork practices. Alyse helps high-achieving women that feel stuck in their wealth, partnership, psychic abilities, trauma, and transform their current realities to get to their next level selves. Her programs are deeply rooted in healing so that women can navigate work, love, and life as powerful leaders without the burden of trauma playing a role in their highest potential. Alyse, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really happy to have you on, and I'm excited for our conversation, knowing how much you and your work aligns with my mindset and my mentality and what I like to put out into the world. So super excited for today's conversation around healing trauma and breathwork and using all of these tools that we have access to really just make a better world. So with that being said, before we get into conversation, I'd like to take a second to share where people can find you. You know, at the beginning of the conversation, rather at the end, people can hear where you're at for socials. You're on Instagram at Alyse_breathes. You're also on Facebook. Your website is alysebreathes.com, and then you're offering a free breathwork, meditation, and journal session, which is kind of a lengthy URL. So I'll just link that up in the show notes rather than read out the whole URL there. Anything else that you wanted to share in terms of where people can find you, or anything else that people should know?
I think you pretty much covered it. Oh, I also have my own podcast called Reclaiming Consciousness. So you can also find that and listen to me there as well.
Yes, I love it. We were chatting a little bit before we hit record on your new journey of starting up a podcast and how much fun that's been for you.
Yeah.
So yes, definitely check out the podcast. Awesome. Very good. So Alyse, I would love to start a conversation today around the idea of trauma. You know, a big part of your work is ancestral trauma. Can you explain, or I guess maybe provide a definition for us of what ancestral or familial trauma is? And then how are you using that in application with the folks that you work with?
Yeah. So, ancestral and familial trauma are similar, but ancestral trauma just refers to the trauma that we take on through the ancestral line, so that we inherit through the generation. So we carry these energetic signatures in our DNA of what our ancestors have experienced. So we literally carry in our DNA everything that our ancestors went through, like good times and bad, traumas, struggles, murders, deaths, all of these things, all of those traumatic things that have happened, we carry within us, and those hold a chemical signature in our cells, and we actually will live in reaction to those feelings and those memories until we actually acknowledge them and understand how they're impacting us and actually use the tools to move through them. And then it's similar with family trauma, right? But that's more usually just referring to this lifetime. So even if you had an incredibly great upbringing, right? Like even if you had two parents who loved you, who had a good relationship, you had everything provided to you, there is still trauma associated. I call it the trauma of being human, just living on this planet. Like even if you had an amazing family, like you still could have fallen off your bike. You still could have got made fun of at school. Like whatever it is, we all have things that we went through, and we hold them because we are really not taught how to feel our emotions or how to even acknowledge our emotions, right? So, and we also, what I also consider trauma is just watching how our parents interacted with the world and their state of consciousness and their belief systems about what the world is and about what kind of a place the world is and what their role is in the world. We take all of that on from our parents, and then we actually apply that unconsciously to our own lives. Even if we came in with like a completely different purpose and mission on this planet, we still kind of feel loyal to or feel like we have to kind of play out this modeling or this program that we watched growing up. So, you know, when I say trauma, it's not just like some terrible thing that happened or some kind of horrible situation. It's just anything that happened to you or that you experienced that was either overwhelming to you or that you haven't fully processed or acknowledged. That is trauma. And then it's also these underlying unconscious beliefs that we took on about the world based on the programming from our family, from society, from the media, and that was passed down through the ancestral lines and even from past lifetimes. So it's all of this programming about what it means to actually be a human and what our limitations are, what we can do and what we can't do, that we don't realize are actually just programs that we're running that actually aren't even true. And we get to decide what the program is, and we get to decide what we're capable of, because the truth is we're capable of way, way, way more than we've been taught. And a lot of that programming is serving to like keep us in these lower frequencies, these lower states of consciousness, so that we don't actually discover the truth of who we are and what we're actually capable of.
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic that I think a lot of people maybe don't even think about until they're made aware, right, of what's going on through maybe a conversation like this. Years or decades of trauma that they maybe knew was there, but they kind of buried it, or they neglected it, or they pushed it to the side. And then the idea of the ancestral trauma is really interesting. The first thing that came to mind for me personally was, because as you were talking, I was trying to think of like, how does this apply for me?
Mm-hmm.
Everything you shared in terms of, you know, having a good upbringing, a good family, two parents that were always around and still are around in my life, very loving, giving in every single way. Like, I'm so blessed to have the childhood and the upbringing that I had, and the family that I continue to have. But that doesn't mean that there aren't, you know, challenges from the past or ancestral challenges. I guess a quick, you know, personal story. So my dad, he's the youngest of 8 kids. So he had 6 older sisters and an older brother, and he wasn't alive during the Great Depression, but his 3 older siblings were. And his parents, my dad's parents, my grandparents, they weren't able to afford to keep all the kids together and feed them and provide for them. And you know, my grandfather was a bricklayer, so he was, you know, out of work during the Great Depression for a number of years, and they literally had to send the 3 different kids to whoever would take them, the cousins, aunts and uncles. And I think because of that, and again, my dad, like, and after the Great Depression, I think their family did okay, and my dad went on and lived a good life and had a good career and provided for us. But it's stuff like that where maybe his mentality, and also with my mother, like, just that generation, I think there's that scarcity mentality
Yes.
rather than maybe an abundance mentality. And that totally trickles down. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I heard from my parents, like, money is the root of all evil. And
Yeah.
just all kinds of comments like that, where it was really just kind of shaming having money or being worthy of making money. And I think a lot of that probably stems from their upbringing and situations like I just described. So it's super interesting, and it's something you don't necessarily think about until you really take the time to think about it.
Oh yeah, and even for me, I started my personal growth journey when I was 19, like over 20 years ago, and that's when I discovered breath work and everything. And I remember when I got into the breath work world, I was really just so intrigued by it, and I more
Mhm.
was interested in it because at that time in my life, I was like so interested in like expanding your mind and psychedelics and that kind of stuff, like changing your perspective. And that's kind of why I went into breath work, because I was like, whoa, this is like, you can have a psychedelic experience without the drugs. Like, this is what I've been searching for. This is so cool. And you can expand your mind and you can go into these different states. But there's also like this huge healing aspect about it. And I remember when I
Mm.
was 19, I was like hanging out with all of these like 30 and 40-year-old people doing like healing through breath work. And I was like this young kid. And I'm like, what is everyone healing from? Like I was like so
Yeah.
confused. I'm like, what are we healing? Like, and I remember for a while I was like, well, I had a really good childhood. Like I didn't have anything bad happen to me. Like, my parents were super supportive still, like kind of what you're describing, like but then as I started to delve into my process and understand like my parents' trauma and how that impacted me and how the way that their trauma impacted them in the way that they interacted with me, like even though because sometimes you don't even realize these little like puzzle pieces, and then you kind of feel guilty saying like, oh well, like it took me a really long time to like admit that, my mom has like narcissistic tendencies, or she
Mhm.
treated me in an emotionally abusive way. Like those are things that still, like when I say it, I'm like, oh God, like I feel bad saying it, but that's actually the truth.
Yeah.
And it's my truth, right? And I'm not saying that needs to be my mom's truth, and she might not be aware of that, but that was what my experience was. And that is the key in moving through trauma and actually having these like big healing experiences, is acknowledging what your experience actually was and how
Mhm.
you actually felt, and acknowledging that instead of you telling yourself a story based on what you think other people would want you to say, or what you think you should have felt, or what you should have experienced, or, oh, like, but my parents were doing the best they can and it wasn't their fault. And like all that stuff is true, right? Like, and your parents are really good people. And you also felt this way. And I think that that is the part that's kind of hard for people. And, even when I'm like, talking about trauma all the time and why it's so important in being successful and why it's so important in making money and why it's so important in finding your purpose, I think it falls flat for people sometimes because of that, because they're like, well, what trauma? Like, what do you mean? Because until you really start to like peel back the layers and start to get really radically honest with yourself,
Mhm.
it kind of falls flat, because you're like, well, what do I have to heal? Like what?
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. So you mentioned with breath work and having a psychedelic experience in terms of healing. Can you maybe share any specific examples that you want to talk about? Because I guess what I'm really wanting to shine light on is for people that are listening that have never had that before, that maybe they are not into breath work and they're listening, they're like, you can reach a altered state of mind from breath work. What does that look like? Can you tell us a little bit more on your experiences with breath work and having either a psychedelic experience or an altered state of consciousness through breath work?
Yeah. So this is might not be exactly the example you're looking for, but I'm feeling called to share because I think this is really important. So you can actually through breath work like go back into a different state of time. Like, so I
Mhm.
had an experience pretty early on when I started doing breath work. And the breath work that I was trained in, we did a lot of healing around your birth trauma and your birth story and your experience in the womb. And that's actually something that I do with all of my clients, because it's usually something that's really skipped. Like, we don't talk about like how your mom was feeling when she was pregnant with you. What was your experience in the womb like? What was going on in the world while you were in the womb? Like, all of these things. And then also your birth itself. And because that's like the first trauma that you experience, right? Is like actually coming out into the world. So I had an experience pretty early on during a breathwork session where I actually was like back in the womb. And I could feel like the experience of myself being in the womb and like what it felt like. And I could feel like my mom is very like anxious and neurotic. And I could feel like that energy while I was in the womb. Like, it was, so I literally like had this experience where I could feel like I was there. I was in the womb and I felt what it felt like. And then I actually saw myself being born, and I saw myself actually taking on my mother's trauma, like, as I left the womb. So it was almost like I took it and then I like left and I was like carrying it with me. And I actually think that's really common for people to take on, especially like our generation, people who've come in as empaths, healers, highly sensitive people, people that are meant to help humanity evolve. When you have that mission or that purpose on the planet, you can easily just be like, oh, I see this person's in pain, I'm going to like take that for them. Or I see that this person is dealing with this, I'm going to take it on so they don't have to. And we think that's like our way of healing. So I see this with a lot of people. So I literally saw myself like taking on her trauma as I exited the womb. And then I actually like went through and like I healed that and I cleared that. But yeah, that was really crazy and trippy.
Yeah, that is super cool. Before you move on to another, it sounded like you maybe were going to transition to another story. I want to cover this a little bit here.
Okay.
It's something that's been on my radar to sit down with my mom and talk about my birth process. Because it's something that I never really thought of until recently. I think I was listening to an Aubrey Marcus podcast episode, and he was talking about this very idea of the birth process and your own specific birth, and even sitting down, if your mother is still around, to sit down with her and talk about what she went through, what it was like. Was it painful? Probably painful to some degree. But how much, for what reasons, what was her experience like? And then maybe relate that to your own experience. And it's such a fascinating idea, because as an infant, we have consciousness, but we don't necessarily have that memory, in terms of like being able to remember specifics of that birth, right?
Yeah.
So but there's still something there of that consciousness and knowing what it was really like. So I've been wanting to sit down with my mom and hear that out, especially because I was a C-section birth. And there had to have been some sort of trauma there with the C-section. And maybe not, maybe it went smoothly, but yeah, I think it'd be really interesting to sit down with my mom and really hear that out, and then start understanding and maybe analyzing whatever she shares. Like, there's some reasons behind certain things that are in my life, or the way I go about life, or just trauma that maybe hasn't been healed. I think it's a really interesting and fascinating idea.
Yeah. And I feel really strongly about this. And I love doing this with people, because I think, a lot of times when you have an understanding of the energy of your birth, you realize that that's actually usually the energy you go into when you're starting anything new. And you kind of will recreate that energy in some way. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be a bad thing, but it's really good to be conscious of it. So like what your birth energy is and what your birth story is. So when you're playing it out. And I love, like, I've created a bunch of tools for people around this, like breathwork sessions and meditations, just to get them to that place where, and it's not even necessarily about like remembering anything, but it's about like accessing the energy of it and then moving through that energy of it. Because I really think that any birth is traumatic in some way, right? Like I have 2 kids and I had them both with no drugs, like it wasn't like any kind of drama around it at all.
Sure. But you still have
a
human coming out of a human.
like I was still traumatized by the whole thing. Right. And it like from an outsider's perspective or like a doctor or something would be like, oh, that was like a perfect thing. You know what I mean? Like it happened the correct way. Like, but it was still traumatic, you know? So I think there's value for anyone in exploring this. And then on top of that, like I said, the other circumstances around it, you know, like I know some people who, if for some reason, like the father wasn't allowed in the hospital room or the parents were in an argument that day or whatever it is, like all of those energies impact your feelings and beliefs about the world. Yeah.
So as the infant that's being born, we actually can feel that energy, whether that's the parents having an argument or the father not being present for the birth for X, Y, or Z reason, or I don't know, maybe there's something that's going on in the actual hospital room where the doctors were freaking out about something, or as the baby, we can actually feel that energy and we hold on to that throughout our life. Is that is a fair statement?
Yeah, definitely. And then also it is. And then also like what was going on like while you were in the womb, while you were developing. Because if you think about it, the energy that is around your mom and how she is reacting to the energy around her is having like a physiological reaction with her in her cells, in her energy. And your cells and your energy are literally being built from her cells and her energy. So like it makes sense that you would literally just take on that energy. So I always say to people, because a lot of times like when I get to some kind of core issue that somebody's having or core block or whatever, usually what I can see is that it's actually a direct like way that they took on the consciousness of their mother. So it's not like their mother taught them anything or they even witnessed anything. It was just them actually just taking on her consciousness in some way where they then had some kind of belief about the world or some kind of block that was stopping them because they literally just took on her consciousness about this specific thing, whatever it is that we're talking about.
Wow. So interesting. And again, it's something that a lot of people don't think about, right? They don't think about what that birth process was like, what trauma was there, what kind of dynamics were present during that birth process, and how has that impacted my life and who I have become. It's super fascinating.
It is. It's really fascinating. And then I had another experience, and this is related. And this actually didn't happen until I was actually pregnant with my son. So I did a ton of breath work in my early 20s and then like, during my 20s and stuff. And then I think I got pregnant with my son at like 31 or 32. And then while I was pregnant with him, I was doing breath work. And I had all of these memories about this trauma that I was carrying from what was going on when I was in my mother's womb. So when I was right before my mom had me, my parents were both teachers, and there was a huge teacher strike in Philadelphia, and my parents had like no money, like zero money. They weren't making any money. They literally couldn't buy anything like for me. And people were like giving them stuff, and there was like all this fear and stuff. And I had in the breathwork session, I had like this whole like download and like memory of like how I was carrying that trauma around money and scarcity and fear around money and fear of like not being okay and not having enough and all of that. And I was able to move through a lot of that like at that time. So it was like another layer of like the trauma that was just around me when I was developing in the womb and right before I came out.
Sure. Yeah, I would imagine fear is something that you probably see a lot with the clients that you're working with, and
Yeah.
you're probably able to, correct me if I'm wrong, you're able to tie back something that has happened in their life and find that root of what is causing that fear. I mean, I guess you can say that for any human, there's a reason why, there's a root reason why we have fear. For certain
Yes.
things, actually for really anything, right? If you're walking down the street and a saber-toothed tiger is running after you, the root of that fear is, going back to our ancestors thousands of years ago when they would see a wild animal that would mean likely death. Um,
Yeah.
but something a little bit more modern, right, and something more practical for today's world is, maybe it's a fear around not making enough money, or a fear of, not being liked or not being accepted, or
Hmm.
not booking that client. There's something
Yeah.
there from our past that it's likely stemming, that fear.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's either like from our childhood or something from our parents, or again, it could be ancestral or past life.
Hmm.
It's usually related to one of those things, especially with people. 'Cause, you know this as somebody who, like, when you start your own business and you go down that path of being an entrepreneur, it requires a
Hmm.
lot of personal development and a lot
Yes.
of like looking at yourself. And one of the most common things I see are like that struggle with people when it's like, okay, well, what are people going to think of me? And people are
Totally.
going to judge me, and people are going to like ostracize me for coming out and saying that I'm psychic, or I have this gift, or I have that gift. And people are like, oh my God, I can't do it. I feel so uncomfortable with what other people are going to think. And that always, almost like, 9 times out of 10, goes back to like that witch wounding, like that we all
Mm.
are kind of carrying this past life ancestral trauma around like being ostracized for having gifts, or being ostracized for being a witch, or whatever it is. Like we all kind of, that's a really common one that I see,
Hmm.
that a lot of people are carrying, because that type of thing happened to so many people, and many people carry that on some level, like in their energy and in their DNA.
Totally. Yeah, something I've always struggled with, and I'm getting much better at it, but something in the past for sure that's been a challenge is imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And those thoughts of, who am I to do this? Who am I to offer advice on this? Who am I to start a podcast? Who am I to
Yeah.
get into breath coaching? Who am I to get into life coaching? Right. And then you stop and realize like how much information we have and how much knowledge there is in the world and education there is online and in person, and connections that you can make, and all of the resources that I have access to. And not to mention the skill sets that I've already built up and the connections I've made. Like, I have all of the tools and resources I need to really do just about anything I want. And
Hmm.
it's sometimes it's as simple as putting that doubt and that fear and those voices in the back of your head and pushing them to the side and getting out of your own way and just going after whatever it is that you want in life. So that's
Yeah.
my motivational speech for the day.
No, I agree with that. And I think that comes from a few different places, like that fear and that imposter syndrome and that doubt. First of
Mhm.
all, it's just like been programmed into us for eons, right? That like you're not good enough. Like if you look at any like media, if you look at any kind of like advertising, if you look at any like thing that's out there that is like being fed to us, it's all around not being good enough.
For
And
sure.
so that's literally just like programmed into us. We take it on from our parents. And then also the other thing that I think is related to that, and this is another like common thing that I see with people, is where people are unconsciously waiting for permission to act instead of
Mhm.
just acting. So it's like you're unconsciously waiting for like your parent to like finally see you, or finally tell you that you're good enough, or finally acknowledge you for being as great as you are, or finally be able to see you, or finally say, I was wrong, I know that I hurt you, but you're amazing. I think
Mhm.
whatever that wound is that we had from growing up, it's like we're unconsciously waiting for somebody else to acknowledge it so that we can move forward with our lives. And that's a
Mhm.
thing that I see with a lot of people too, is like they have this unconscious like waiting energy where you're still wanting permission from somebody else to step forward. And really, like, no one's ever going to give you that permission except for you.
Yeah, it's such an important lesson to learn in life, is that no one else is gonna give you that permission, like you said,
Yeah.
except for yourself. It's very freeing too. It's very liberating once you come to that realization, for sure.
Yeah, because then you can be like, oh, well, I can actually be whatever I want. I can actually call myself whatever I want. I can
Mm,
step forward in whatever way I want and create it. And I don't
yeah,
have to listen to what I think anyone thinks I'm supposed to do.
for sure. Yeah, another personal example here. It's not around healing trauma, but it is around, I guess, healing a roadblock that I've dealt with in the last year or so. In terms of my trajectory and where I'm heading with my life and my career and my relationships, I've entered into this like kind of new universe, I guess you could say, with breath work and healing and spirituality and meditation and a lot of things that you and I understand and appreciate and are a big part of our lives. But if you look at much of society, maybe they wouldn't appreciate it or they wouldn't understand it. So for me, and the reason why I think I struggled with it was just like coming from a family that's just very old school, kind of traditional, Midwestern family into sports. You go to your 9 to 5, you come home, you cook dinner, maybe watch TV for 2 hours, you wake up and you do it all over again. And if you think about our Western society, like a lot of people do that, like that is their life. And for me, like I've always been a little different and wanted to do stuff differently, right? Be an entrepreneur, set my own schedule, be my own boss, work with people that I love and care about and want to help. And then really in the last year or so is when I've gotten into everything that I mentioned in terms of the spirituality and the meditation and breath work and X, Y, and Z, right? And I think I put so much like burden on myself and this like pressure to be somebody, right? To like fit into who I like, where I came from and still like be a part of that family and that the friends and like that friend circle, right? The normal life, right? And how can I either hold on to that or let go of it, but then also step into this new world that I'm in? And it was a lot of pressure. It was heavy. And I went to a retreat. I was talking to you earlier about Our Breath Collective out in San Diego. I went out to a retreat in Topanga, California, and it was a weekend retreat. Most of it was around breath work. And there was one session, it was like an hour-long breathwork session. We were doing pretty extensive deep breathing, and a lot of people had, trauma healing experiences or a psychedelic or altered state of mind. And it wasn't really like trauma healing, but it was, I guess in a way it is like it's present trauma that I've been holding on to, or at least pressure of who am I and who do I want to become and how do I handle that with societal norms. And it was just so beautiful at the end of that session to realize like, dude, this is a new world you're stepping into. And it's okay to just be yourself. You don't have to try to hold on to that old world. You can let go of it and you can accept the new world. And it was very liberating and very, very, what's the word? I'm trying to think of an appropriate word for it. It was liberating. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you and I can totally relate. And I think anyone who's on the path that you and I are on can relate to this because you really do have to kind of let a piece of yourself go. Like my parents were both teachers, like I mentioned, and I was a school counselor. And I worked in the same school district that my parents worked at for 30 years or whatever. They worked there, the school district of Philadelphia, and I worked there too. And I was literally like, even though I had done so much work and all this breath work and everything, and I was still like living out like that same life, like living in Philadelphia, kind of the same thing. I mean, maybe a little bit different, but basically the same thing. And when I decided to, run my business full time and quit my job, like there was this feeling of like, I was like being disloyal to them. And then as I continued to grow, like I definitely feel like there's like family members and friends who like just don't get what I'm doing at
Right.
all. Like who
Right.
are just like,
Same.
what the fuck is she doing? Like,
Right.
like I still don't think, I mean, my parents are really supportive. I still don't think they quite understand what I do. My dad is
Right.
always interested in how much money I make because he thinks it's awesome that I make like way more money than I used to. So he's really
Sure.
like excited about that.
Yep.
But they still don't really understand what I do. And and I have people in my life that it's just like, I understand that feeling where you kind of feel like guilty or something that you're kind of leaving these people behind. But you know, on the other side of it, I see so many people that like that's what ends up keeping them stuck is like that
Mm.
they are like, okay, well, I'm just going to wait till other people figure it out, or I'm just going to like, I don't want to leave people behind. And that's one of the things that keeps you stuck is like you can't be in the mindset of not wanting to leave people behind, as
Right.
uncomfortable as it can be. We really are creating a new world for ourselves, and we have to be the ones to step forward and do it, and then let other people follow.
Yeah.
But I totally relate because I went
Yeah.
through the exact same thing, and I'm still going through the exact same thing. I mean, I think most people in my life, they might love me, but they're also like, what the fuck?
Right.
The old people, like the people
Right.
from my past,
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe this is just me being self-conscious, but I wouldn't be surprised if I have a few people in my life that are like texting each other, like, "What the fuck is Dan putting out there right now? This is the weirdest shit I've ever seen." I wouldn't be surprised. Again, I have
Yeah.
no evidence of it, but that's okay. It's and I appreciate you sharing all of that. I think it's something I need to hear that I'm not alone, and
Yeah.
that what's happening here is, at least for me, and what I sense is that, yeah, maybe I am exiting some relationships and friendships from my past or even from my present. Uh, or maybe at the very least, they'll just like kind of transform into something different. But if they're not willing to accept who I am and who I'm becoming and where I'm going, that's okay. I'm still going to go. I'm still going there. And if they want to follow, then awesome. And if not, if they want to keep doing whatever they're doing, then they're certainly free to do that as well. So yeah, it's really
Yeah.
important. I think just to like kind of going back to breath work, right? Take a deep breath and just like realize it's all going to be okay.
And also, like, who do you want to be in your life, too? Like, if you are wanting to be at a certain level or have a certain type of reality, like, you want to surround yourself with people who not only are able to hold that vision for you, but also are at that level so that you can calibrate to them. So, that all you also want to look at, too, like, well, what kind of people do I want to surround myself with?
For sure. Yeah, it's a super interesting concept around um, vibrational levels, and I want to touch on this for a while. I want to get back to breath work and healing trauma, but maybe we can riff on the vibration of our world, because it's something I've been putting a lot of thought into in terms of
Yeah.
like it's almost like the pay it forward concept, right? If I receive something like a gift from somebody, or somebody does a kind act or deed for me, then it's my duty to go out and do something kind for somebody else, right? To pay for somebody's coffee that's behind me in line, or just give a compliment, or even just sharing a smile for somebody that you pass. I believe, and again, it's something I'm putting a lot of thought into lately, that if I can raise my vibration, right, my energy, my good vibes in the world, and start circulating that around to the rest of the world, and they start seeing that, and then it encourages them to raise their vibration and their energy and their good deeds and their attitude, and all of a sudden you start looking around and you have a world that is functioning at a higher level than we were a year ago or 10 years ago or 100 years ago. And I see that, I think, and I sense it too, with all the crazy shit that's happening in the world. Like, if you put that aside, I still think we have made a ton of progress with spirituality, with kindness, with compassion, with even just actual physical violence. If you look at, wars,
Mhm.
sure, there's still physical violence, of course, but in terms of, if you compare it to 10 years ago, 30 years ago, 100, 2,000 years ago, physical war is definitely declining, right? So I think that's
Mhm.
something to pay attention to and appreciate. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that vibrational level, that it's like a cascading effect, where if you you get there and you encourage a few more people to come along, and then all of a sudden you have just a better world.
Well, yeah. And I also think that you experience what it is that the frequency that you're emitting to the world, right? So if you are emitting a high frequency and you're emitting a frequency of love and connection and harmony and abundance and, whatever it is that the frequency that is coming from you, because I always say like our bodies are like antennas and we experience what we're putting out on the antenna, then you will experience that. And maybe like not everybody in the world is changing their frequency, but I do believe that, as we continue to step in and create a new world for ourselves, that we will start to kind of shift to the point where if someone's not vibrating in the same frequency as you, then they won't really end up being in your reality. You know what I mean? So, and yes, I agree with you. I think things are really shifting. And I think what we're seeing on the world stage is actually a reflection of that, because it's almost like the birthing process where like there has to be like, it has to get really ugly and there has to be like really bad pain and contractions and all of that stuff before the rebirth happens. And I think we're kind of in that stage right now where we're in the birthing process and it's not pretty.
Yes.
But I think as more and more people start to wake up, and that is also a catalyst for people to wake up, right? Like all the craziness happening in the world, it shakes people. Like you were saying, you started this podcast like right when COVID happened because you were like, what the fuck is going on here? I think that was kind of the first wave of people waking up and being like, what the fuck is this? And then also you had so many people then at home and they were like, wait, what am I doing with my life? Like, why am I going to this job every day? Like, what am I really meant to be doing? Like, so there was all of these people who are having these awarenesses and awakenings to who they really are, to what's going on in the world, and to what is possible. And so I feel like then, so many people raise their frequency within that as well. But I think like I was saying, the more you focus on admitting a higher frequency, and then the way that you do that is through obviously your own consciousness, but also doing the deeper work to acknowledge your trauma and the shadows and all of the stuff within you that you haven't been previously willing to acknowledge. Once you do that, then you automatically start emitting a higher frequency through breath work. That's a great way to do it too. And then you automatically will attract into your experience people that are of a like frequency, right? So I think then you just start to have that experience. So and I do agree with you. I think the world is shifting, and I do think that you have the ability to shift people by everyone that you come into contact with. I've seen in people's Akashic records that like part of their purpose is just to hold a certain frequency on the planet, or just to share their light with people. It's not necessarily about a whole big thing. It's just about they came here to anchor in a certain frequency so that people could align to that frequency. So yeah, I agree. And I think that things really are shifting. And I also think that people are starting to be much more aware and tuned into energy and frequency. Whereas before it kind of seemed like, even for me, like, and I channel energy work as part of what I do with people. And even like 2 years ago, I was like, what is this energy work stuff? And now I'm like full on, like it's a huge piece of what I do. And I can read energy really well, and I am super tuned into it. So I think even people now are being so much more just aware and able to feel energy on a level that we haven't been before.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of what you're describing here, and I know a big part of your work is around the quantum field. Is what you're describing here, is that the same thing as the quantum field? And if yes or no, can you maybe describe a little bit more, or define? I'm big into definitions. Can you maybe define what the quantum field is, and then how are you able to connect something like breathwork to the quantum field?
Yeah. So the quantum field is just the field of infinite possibility. So it exists in the present moment, where infinite possibilities exist and you can instantly manifest things in the quantum because it's just energy, right? It hasn't taken form yet. And breath work is directly related to that because when you are doing breath work, you are in present time. You can't take a breath in the past. You can't take a breath in the future. You have to be in the present moment when you're doing breath work. So you automatically connect with the quantum field and you're living in the quantum field. That's why, for me, whenever my clients are doing a ton of breath work, they always open up and shift their perspective and they always start to open up to like new possibilities or call things in that they never thought they would because they're now much more connected to that field of infinite possibility. So that's what I like to call it. And then with the energy work, that all exists within the quantum field. So it's like in the now moment. And then what I'm able to do is kind of like read people's energy and then go in and clear the blocks on like an energetic level. So I'll be able to see exactly what it is. And then I will do a clearing around it. It's usually just channeled and based on kind of like what I see in the moment. If I see some kind of block or there's some kind of pattern that needs to be released, I will clear the pattern on an energetic level, and then I will like fill it up with a new pattern, right? Like whether it's like unconditional love or trust or an activation of their gifts on a deeper level, like whatever it is. So I will just literally go in and rearrange things on an energetic level so that they can experience everything much easier on the physical level, because everything starts with energy, right? And even beyond the realm of thought, right? Because I have a lot of clients who they're aware of their thought patterns and they're aware that they're doing something, right? Like where it's like, oh, I know I'm in codependency, for example. And every time it happens, I'm telling myself, I'm not responsible for him. I'm not responsible for him. And I'm like, yeah, but that's only your thoughts. Like you have to go into the feeling level of it because that's the energetic, right? So when we get to it from the energetic and we're aware of the feeling behind it, like, well, what's the feeling behind why you are being codependent, right? And usually it's like not feeling safe or not trusting that you're going to be taken care of or fear of not surviving, right? And when we can get to that and clear that on a deep energetic level, then you can start to you don't even have to think about not being codependent. You just become not codependent because there's nothing within you that doesn't feel safe anymore.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I realize like energy healing is probably pretty difficult to explain, especially to somebody that doesn't know anything about it. I would imagine it's very, an experiential thing that once you experience it, then you can understand it truly.
Yeah. And also the other thing, just to add, not to cut you off, but I just want to add to that is that, with energy works, one of the biggest things I've noticed about it is that it's much harder for it to take effect on somebody that is closed down. So like somebody that is not open to it or somebody that's just in the very beginning stages of their process and they haven't opened up to deeper levels of themselves and they haven't gone kind of deep within themselves and they're not that open, it's not going to take effect. I mean, it will help, but it's not going to take effect as much as it would with somebody like if I did some energy work on you, you would probably be like, holy shit, that was crazy. And I would be like, oh my God, this whole huge thing happened. And you would be like, oh my God, I know, because you're tuned in.
Yeah.
So it works a lot better. Like the more you're tuned into yourself and the more open you are, because there's on an energetic level, you have to believe that it's working, right? Like you have to believe that something is shifting in order for it to shift. And I think that's where people get caught up with it because we're so used to this old model of like, oh, like I'll believe it when I see it, or like this old medical model of like everything is very like symptomatic and physical and it's just one thing that's wrong and we fix it. And on the energetic level, it's completely different. It's about awareness and it's about subtleties and it's about what you believe to be true.
Yeah.
So if like you're open to it, then everything's going to open up for you. But if you're not, it's going to be like chipping away at like a brick wall. I'm going to have to do a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that comes down to what you're explaining is mindset. And I think mindset is so important for almost anything that we do, right? If you were to compare this to, let's say you're working with a personal trainer and you go into a workout and you're just like, I don't want to do this. I'm not going to get anything out of this. What am I doing? It's a waste of time. You're probably not going to have a very good workout. You're not going to get the results
Right.
that you want. And it's the same thing with anything else in life, but specifically with energy healing. If you're going into it with an open mind and open heart, it's going to make it a lot easier to achieve those results.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you actually like believe that it can work, you know what I mean? Like, because I think that's the hard thing for people. And even for me, like when I first started getting energy work, I was
Mm,
kind of like, what the fuck is this? Like what,
yeah.
like I liked it and I liked how I felt, but there was also like a part of my brain that was like, is anything really happening? You know,
Yeah.
because it's so subtle that it kind of takes a little bit of time for you to start to subtly like open up, and
hmm
then you can like kind of experience the fullness of it.
Yeah. So you just mentioned a really interesting phrase, which is like a part of your brain kind of had a little like doubt or a little thought, like, is this going to work? And obviously with energy healing or energy clearing, a lot of it is the physical space, but how much of it is the mental space in terms of the neuroscience level, in terms of trauma or pain that we hold on to? Yes, it sits on our physical body, but there's also a big part of that that sits in our minds. Can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about the difference between when you're doing energy clearing or energy healing? Is there a difference between what's going on with the actual physical body and I understand the mind and the brain is part of the physical body, but what's the correlation there between the mind and the body?
The way that I see it is I think it starts with the body and it starts with the feelings in the body, and then the mind reacts to that. And that's
Mm,
kind of what I've seen as I tune into like so many people
mhm,
is it starts with a feeling in the body of like whatever that feeling is, whether it's like feeling unsafe or anxiety or, and anxiety is usually a result of pushing down feelings.
mhm,
So, and then the body starts to react, and then the mind starts to react to the body. So then the mind will start thinking like, oh, this is what's wrong, or this is what I need to worry about, or then the mind will go into these specific thought patterns that it goes into based on the feelings in the body, because it's kind of like a physiological. I think a lot of it is like these energetic patterns that we're used to running, and
mhm.
these chemicals and hormones that are used to being produced in the body, and they start to run on these cycles. And it could be from a thought, right? Like, so I'm not saying it's always the body first, but I always think the body is feeling, and then the mind is kind of playing out those feelings through thoughts, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
No, it does. It does. And like I said earlier, I think a lot of this is experiential, and
Totally. Yeah.
it's much easier to understand and really fully articulate it when you experience it. And
Yeah.
like you said, it's if you go into it with an open mind and an open heart, you're going to get a lot more out of it. Another
Definitely.
on this topic, another I guess topic I want to cover is the idea of energetic cord cutting.
Hmm.
And actually, just this morning, I did a cord cutting breathwork session. It was through an app. Um, it was, I don't know if I got out of it as much as I could have. I don't know if it's something that maybe the more I do it, the better it'll be. Maybe it was because it was through an app. I didn't have as much of an effect. But can you tell us a little bit more about energetic cord cutting and how you apply that in your business?
Yeah. I mean, so I do that as part of most energy work that I do will always cut cords. So basically, like a cord would be anytime you interact with somebody, you would have like an energetic cord with them. Like, for example, like you and I would have a cord right now, but most likely because after we leave this conversation, there's probably not going to be any like friction between us or any like lingering thing that we would hold on to other than being like, oh, that was fun or whatever.
Yeah,
So we
yeah,
most likely wouldn't have. I mean, it could still serve us to cut the cord when we're done just to have clear energy, but it's not like there would be any like lingering, like energetic of like holding on to something or feeling responsible for each other's energy or whatever it is. But a lot of times we will have cords to people that we have some kind of like codependent pattern with them or some kind of unhealthy dynamic where there's something between us that is that's not fully healed or that's holding us into the past. So when, and that would be like your parents, or you can even cut cords with like systems, or it doesn't have to be a person. It can be like a thought construct, right? Or like a thought program or whatever. But, when you have specific cords with people, it's just like a way that your energy is being pulled on and attached to something that's no longer serving you, right? And then when you want to cut the cords, it's basically like severing ties with that energy and clearing it from your field so that you're kind of like reclaiming all of your consciousness, like you're reclaiming all of your energy so that it's no longer being pulled on and sucked by these other things that you have this like unfinished business with, so to speak.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So this session I did this morning, I focused on someone, it's a friend of mine, that there's been like some tension between us lately, just like, conflicting ideas or conflicting opinions. And some of that has gotten in the way of our relationship. And I certainly don't want to lose him as a friend. So it's like, I thought of him on cutting that cord of that negative energy and that tension and the differing opinions, and letting all of that go and kind of healing that friendship. And so I guess my question is, at the end of the session, I really didn't feel much, right? I didn't like feel better or felt like that part of the relationship was healed. Is that something that maybe as days go by or weeks go by that it could still show up?
It can, but I would actually, I think with energy work, one of the biggest things that people don't understand about it is like you have to do it a lot, actually.
Okay.
Like
that's what I felt.
Because when you think, so I always explain it like this. Think about how we have been bombarded with programming since birth. And now we want to do one energy work session and erase all of that. Like we need to like combat that programming with just as much energy work, right?
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be just as much, but a lot. So like, like I do a clearing thing with my clients and I tell them, I'm like, do this clearing on yourself like 20 times a day. Like do it every time you talk to somebody. Like I'm cutting cords. Like when I'm standing in the kitchen cooking dinner, I'm like cutting cords with my husband. I'm cutting cords with my kids. I'm connecting my kids into the earth and up to source so they're not bothering me. Like I'm doing shit all the time because it's also like on this subtle energetic level. And if you think about like, you're running this programming since birth, right? That you're so used to. So in order to kind of shift that energy, you need to do it a lot and you need to get used to like the feeling of it. And the more that you do it, the easier it'll be. And then the more you're going to have those experiences. So it's almost like what you focus on expands. So if you're like, okay, I really want to shift things with this person, then I would not only just do one cord cutting, I would cut cords every day. I would write down what's really going on for me here. What is the need that I have that I am looking to be met in this situation? Like, you know what I mean? Like dig deep.
For sure.
And because I think, just doing one, like those things can be helpful, but I would do it a lot, I guess is my point. Because with energy work, you need to kind of like really be regular with it and do it a lot. And then you actually get good at it. And then you start doing it without even realizing it, and that's what the point you really want to get to.
Yeah. I mean, it's like anything else. The more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. Like if you relate it to running a marathon, right? That first week of training, you can maybe go out for a mile run or 3 miles, depending on what your level of running is. And then after 3 months of training, you're able to run 26.2 miles. And sure, it's tough, but you're able to do it.
Yeah.
Or breath work, right? Like a year ago, I was a total beginner on breath work, and those first few sessions, didn't really know what I was doing. And then more you do it, more you practice, the better you become, the more you get out of it, the more
Yeah,
effective it becomes.
exactly.
So yeah, that's cool. It's a new space for me. Energy healing and cord cutting is extremely new to me. Um, but I'm excited. I can tell that there's something there, and it's definitely a new chapter that I'm going to be exploring.
Yeah.
Cool. I heard you mention the word Akashic Records earlier, and I know you've talked about that before on different podcasts that you've been on that I've listened to, and it's a big part of the work that you do. Can you explain to us, and maybe it's stuff that we've already covered, but can you explain to us what Akashic Records are and what how it applies to everything that we've been talking about?
Yeah. So the Akashic Records, I like to describe them as it's basically anything that's ever occurred or will ever occur in the universe. So it's like a library of everything.
Hmm.
And I experience them as like living at a certain frequency. It's just this information that is existing in this frequency, and I'm able to tune into that frequency and tap into the Akashic Records. So if I was reading your Akashic Records, for example, I'd be tuning into the evolution of your soul, everything your soul has experienced and everything your soul is wanting to experience. So when I tune into someone's Akashic Records, I'm able to see, past life influences, ancestral influences, also like any galactic energies or guides that they have, and then also like what they're really wanting to step into next, and then additionally like what is blocking them from getting there. And then I usually will channel energy work within the Akashic Records to shift those blocks so that they can step into that next part of their evolution.
Hmm. So interesting. Yeah, I mean that really does tie into everything that we have covered in terms of
Yeah.
ancestral trauma and things that we faced individually in our lives, maybe childhood experiences, and then also just looking at whether it's good or bad, like what has happened to us and what we're going through right now, and how we can take that and bring it into, like I was talking about earlier, bringing that into the new world that you may be entering into and creating that
Yeah.
ideal life that you want.
Yeah, and also like just really, they can really help you with like your purpose or what you're meant to be doing, and also like what is your truth, and the best way for you to kind of like move forward. So I think the Akasha records are great because they really hold a high frequency of truth and purpose, where you can really get a lot of answers from
Hmm.
the records. So it's a really great tool that I use with everyone, and it's been really helpful for me to be able to tap into.
What does that look like when you're going through Akashic Records with your clients? Can you either share what that looks like, or maybe like I guess I'm just really curious. Like if you were working with me, right, with the Akashic Records,
Mhm.
what does that look like?
So, okay, so I guess there's like two ways of answering this, because if I'm just doing like a single reading for you, which I don't do those very often anymore, but I do sometimes,
Hmm.
then I would be like, okay, we're tuning into your Akashic Records right now. Tell me what's going on for you in your life, what your challenges are, and then I'll just start tuning in and I'll start giving you the information that I'm receiving. So it could
Mm.
work like that if we're just doing like a one-off Akashic Records reading, and you can ask
Hmm.
whatever questions and I'll tell you what I see. But then, more regularly for me, I'm working with people for a longer period. And when I'm doing that, like I'm basically always in your Akashic Records. Like if you're somebody that I'm working with for a longer period of time, I'm basically always in your record. So any answer you're going to get from me is going to be coming from this higher perspective within your records, based on what I'm seeing for what you're meant to be doing on this planet, what your blocks are, and what like is the next step for you. Like I'll kind of always be tuned into that for you. So it's not really something where I have to be like, okay, we're going to read your Akashic Records now. I'm just like naturally always doing it. Like when I
Hmm.
first started reading the records and I like did it for the first time, I was like, oh, I've always been doing this. sense. Like this is something
Yeah.
I just naturally do. So,
Interesting.
yeah, so it's just like something I'm naturally tuned into for you. And then all the information you receive from me is going to be from that vantage point, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's super interesting concept with the Akashic Records. So you described it as like something that's it's a library of everything that's really ever happened, right? Is that what you said?
Yes. Hmm.
So does that mean so like on an individual level, am I maybe on a subconscious level aware of everything that's ever happened in the history of the universe? Or is
Yes.
that
Yes.
okay?
Yes. Anybody can tap into that. We all have the ability to. It's just obviously some people more than others are more, it's easier for them and are meant to work with the records. But I think that
Mm-hmm.
everybody can. And it's really just the way that we tune into information, right?
Yeah,
And obviously there's a way of doing it, and it's good to like get information and learn how to do it. But
sure.
anybody can do it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like the thing that I'm thinking about right now is that story I shared earlier of my grandparents living during the Great Depression and the challenges that
Hmm.
they faced. Like I know of that from the stories that my dad told me, but I don't know anything about it. I don't know what it feels like or what they went through or really anything of what that was like. But there is a part of me that kind of feels like I am aware of
Yeah.
the challenges that they faced and the
Yeah.
trauma that was there.
Definitely.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
really cool.
And
This
I
is something
think,
I'm definitely going to be exploring more.
yeah, I mean, we all have that awareness too. It's just that we ignore
Hmm.
it.
Yeah, that or maybe it's an awareness thing too, right? And a lot of people are not even aware of what Akashic records are. You know, before our conversation, I
Yeah.
was not aware. So I'm glad you're bringing that to our world and sharing that awareness.
Yeah.
There's one other concept that I want to cover is miracle frequency. Can you tell us a little bit
Okay.
more about what a miracle frequency is and how you apply that?
Yes, definitely. So, okay. So I guess probably in the beginning of 2021, I started really going deep into my ability to channel information and working with my guides. And I'm able to channel a lot of these different galactic energies and healing energies. And I also started channeling like my own energy work techniques and energy healing techniques.
Hmm.
And it's hard for me to even like it's hard to even explain because it was something that just like literally like downloaded through me. Like I remember I was standing right over here and I got this kind of like download of this miracle frequency activation where I was going to help people activate this frequency within them. So it's literally a frequency where you're holding this energy that everything you have this awareness that everything that you experience is a miracle, meaning it's happening for you and not to you. So it's this like shift of consciousness of like feeling like, life is random and it's just like happening to you and
Yeah.
seeing everything as like this series of miraculous events that's unfolding perfectly for you to continue to walk down the path you're meant to walk down. So this activation that I downloaded was to activate this frequency, this knowing, this understanding within people.
Mm.
So that's what I did. And I think the first time I did like a group one was like last April or March or something. And it was really, really powerful. And then since then, I've been downloading these other kind of frequency activations. One was called the Galactic Access Codes. I'm doing another one next week called the Pleiadian Energetic Attunement. So I like download these like activations, I guess you could call them, to help people align with these different frequencies. And believe me, it sounds crazy to me because when this stuff was coming through, I'm like, what? I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like, what is this?
Yeah.
And I would hear the guidance like from my guides and stuff who would be like, listen, it doesn't really matter like what you say. It's just like the energy that you are transmitting to people. And they were like
Mm.
very clear about that. And I've also had a lot of validation from astrologers and other people who've like read my energy that I am meant to channel these energies for people in order to help people like raise their frequency. So, it, as much as I've been trying to get my own bearings with it over the last year, because I'm just like, what am I even doing?
Mm-hmm.
I know that it works and I see the results that people have and I can feel the energy of it and I'm just going with it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I know what you mean. For people listening, it's probably pretty easy to be like, what the fuck are they talking about? um, but when you talked about the idea of, this is the universe conspiring to have things that are happening for me and not to me. I think a lot of people are going through that right now, right?
Yeah.
During COVID, like I know I am for sure. I look back at my life from the last 2 years, and
Mm-hmm.
really for anybody on this planet, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of things that we can pinpoint and say, "Yep, that sucked. That was a shit show. This is awful." You can go down the list of negativity. But when I really look at what's happening right now and my life, like my career and my my being, who I am, I'm so excited, like where things are going. And I honestly
Mm-hmm.
don't think this would be happening in terms of like a shift in my career and new career opportunities and starting up the podcast and getting into to life coaching and breathwork coaching and having a real impact on this world. I don't think I would have gotten here, or if I did, it would have taken a lot longer. I guess is a better way of saying it. I think I would have eventually
Mm-hmm.
found this path. But COVID was a catalyst for me to just pause what I was doing, which was my photography business. And I was experiencing burnout and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do in life and what I was destined to do and who I was meant to be. Pretty lost, honestly. And then it's just this cascade of events that have happened in the last year or so that have just been beautiful, like discovery, self-discovery and healing and better health and better relationships and happiness. I mean, that's the biggest thing that
Yeah.
I think we often forget about is like why we do all of this. Why wake up and go to work and sit down on a podcast like we're doing and work with all of our clients and grow our business. Like why? For me, it's happiness. I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
biggest thing in life is if you're not happy, then what's the point? So
Yeah.
anyhow, what I'm getting at is there's a silver lining, and that's actually one of my favorite movies is Silver Linings Playbook.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a silver lining when you start thinking like, oh, this is happening to me. It's actually happening for you, and there are silver linings there. And when you start tapping into that and letting that open up, man, it's a beautiful life that we can live.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, I feel the same way when I look back on like all of the struggles that I've had, especially in the last 2 years. I'm just like, holy shit, but I'm a completely different person.
Right?
Like, I'm showing up completely differently in all areas of my life as a wife,
Yes.
as a mother, as a business owner. Like, it's crazy. Like, if you would have looked at me in like 2018, like I would not be recognizing myself right now. So like as hard as it's
Yeah.
been, like it is like we're going through these crazy transformations and it's hard, but it's also the most exciting and liberating thing ever.
Yes. 100%. And I actually want to just take a quick second to pause there and just say like that's awesome, right? Congratulations to you. Congratulations to me and anyone else
Yeah.
that is experiencing the same thing. And if you're not, if you're in a spot where you're like it's tough for you and it's dark, know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Just keep going. Like just keep going.
And get
You're gonna get
support.
there.
Get
Yeah, get
support.
support. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Awesome. Elise, this has been so good. I do have one final question for you. Before we get to that, I just want to reiterate where people can find you. You're on Instagram, Alyse
Mhm.
underscore breathes. Is that correct? That's your
Yes,
Instagram
that's
handle.
correct.
And your website is alysebreathes.com. And you have your podcast. Can you mention one more time your podcast
Yes,
title?
my podcast is called Reclaiming Consciousness, and it's on all
Awesome.
platforms, so you can find me there too.
I love it. Very good. So my last question for you, Alyse, is who do you want to impact the most with the work that you do?
Oh, probably the kids, I have two kids, 5 and 7, and like not and it's funny because not directly, because I obviously don't work with kids, but I think a lot of my motivation, because I did work with kids for many years and I have my own kids, and I
Mhm.
see the way that what's happening in the world is impacting them. And that makes me even more want to create a new world and create a new world for them. Um, Sorry, I've been like so emotional today about my kids. I'm gonna cry. Um,
It's okay.
but yeah, so I think that's kind of the biggest thing for me is just like wanting to help people change their lives so that they can contribute to the creation of the new earth, and so like all of our kids can experience the fruits of that. So I think
Mm.
that's the biggest thing for me right now.
I love that. It's so important. Our next generation is sometimes overlooked, but if you think about it, it's it's what we have in this world, right? Yeah, we have
It's the
present.
most important thing.
Yeah, like sure we have our present moment, we have today, we have you and I talking, we have our generation, our adults, right, that are doing whatever it is that we're doing in life. But it is the most important thing because once we go, they're next, right? And then
Yep.
it's their turn to really have an impact on this world. And then once they go, it's their kids that's next. And if we ever lose sight of that, nurturing the next generation, nurturing our kids, when you lose sight of that, then it's like that's it. You know,
Yeah.
that's kind of the end of the line. So it's so important
Yeah.
to pour into the next generation. I love that.
Totally.
Awesome. Well, Alyse, this has been such a beautiful conversation. I really appreciate everything you've shared and in your time. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. It was great.